Hello, everybody. This is Craig Ferguson, and welcome to CJF Realm and Designer U Ministries. Today, we're going to share something that God has put on our heart, a portion of Him revealing Himself to us, so that in Him revealing Himself to us, we can understand more of who we actually are. So watch with us and engage with this session, so that we can become all that God has designed us to be. Continuing on what we shared earlier, where in the book of Genesis, in the previous video, we covered Genesis 1, 1 and 2, verse 2. Now we're going to talk about verse 3. But before I share that, what I want to do, I don't kind of get in front of this now. What I want to do is challenge you to start looking at things and begin to evaluate them according to what's written in the scriptures. Okay? And I know some of you may be saying, well, I'm already doing that. Well, yeah, but there's always the call to go deeper. Remember, this is about God calling us to go deeper. So some ancient Hebrew professors will tell you, and some very wrong term. Some spirit-filled leaders will also tell you that have studied and God has shown them great many revelations and insights. They will tell you that in the Old Testament, at least every Hebrew word is made up of or can have 72 up to 72 different meanings. They're all connective. It's not like it's one way over there. There's a negative and positive polarity to, and I'm using the word polarity is purposefully, because polarity has to do with energy. There is a negative and positive polarity with each Hebrew, both letter and meaning, and word. All right, they have both negative and positive connotations linguistically. Okay, so they're at one level, yes, it will mean this. But as you go deeper, you find out that there's so much more to what this is all about, what life is all about, what life in his word, life in his presence is all about. So, for example, as a child, I used to love working or playing with Hot Wheels, those little metal cars. And I would literally, because I was so fascinated with the Hot Wheel cars, and I became fascinated with cars in general, right? So my mom and my dad, before my dad left, he bought a lot of Hot Wheel cars for me. So I had all these different kinds of cars, right? And so I would get into the world of Hot Wheels before there was a show. A Hot Wheels cartoon. I would get into the world of the Hot Wheel car. I would get into its small world, and I would engage it, and would be like, oh wow, this is awesome. And then maybe a couple of years later, it was G.I. Joe, and I would get into its what I would be talking to it. I would make it talk and all that stuff. What I was doing, I was co-creating. It's a term called co-creating. All right. It's a term called co-laboring. All right. And so in the midst of this, as I continue to grow older, I had less and less of a desire to spend time in the Hot Wheels world, in the G.I. Joe world, when I hit like third grade or something like that, it was a bicycle. I loved riding the bike, and I was be on the bike all the time as much as I could during the warm periods of time in that year. And then it went to cars. I'm actually driving a car now, and I just love being in cars. So with each growth stage that I went through, a whole new set of perspective. I judged life differently at each level of my growth. I evaluated the current reality, and then I perceived going forward what could be next. So, with all that said, let's look at Genesis 1 and 3, but as a companion, we're going to look at Genesis 1 and 3, and then we're going to look at Exodus chapter 3, verses 4 through 14, because those two are very connected. All right, let's go into it. No. There we go. Let's come up out of it. Let's get that out of there. Now, we're back. Because I want that scratch too. All right, Genesis 1 and 3. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that it was good. I want you to think about that for just a moment. Let there be light. About 30 years ago, I was studying this, and I came across, as I saw that, right? I saw let there be light. And God was literally just causing light to form, to take shape. Now remember what I said in John 1, in him was light, was in him, and that light was the light. Life was in him, and in him was the light. John 1, in him was life, and that life was the light of men. There is a light that's in God. And he says here, let there be light. So now let's go to Exodus 3 and bring it a little bit more clearer. Verse 4, it says, when Moses had been in the desert for 40 years, and at the end of this 40-year development phase, where some scholars have even said that he developed a stutter over that 40-year period. He was significantly educated in Egypt, but when he spends 40 years in a mountain range dealing primarily with sheep, he develops a stutter. All right. So in verse 4, I believe it's verse 3, he sees a bush that's burning, and it says, verse 3 says, so Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. Why the bush does not burn up. And it says, when the Lord saw that, verse 4, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look at this, God called to him from within the burning bush. It's going to make sense in just a minute. It's going to make sense for you in just a minute. Moses begins to have this conversation with God, and God having the conversation with Moses. But look at verse 14, because in this setting, Moses is getting his call to go back to Egypt and free the Israelites. And this is what he says. Verse 13, Moses said to God, Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the Lord God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? Look at verse 14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. That is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. And I said, well, let me look up. I had one of those Bibles where you could, it was a lot of lexicon study helps in there, and I looked it up. And it gave me reference. It says things like, I exist, I'm the self-existent, I'm self-existent, and so forth and so on. But then it gave a reference. And the reference is Genesis 1 and 3. So I went right to Genesis 1 and 3, and I looked up where it said, let there be. And it's translated as a phrase, but it's actually I am. Blew my mind. This was about 30 years ago. Blew my mind. I said, what? And so when I take the literal of that phrase, it's saying, God is saying in verse 3 of Genesis 1, I am light. Or I exist as light. So the word or this phrase, I am, is actually one Hebrew word. And in the Hebrew language, it's these letters, hey, or actually hey, yod, and hey. Hey is used frequently in the scriptures, and it's actually part of the name of God. Whenever you see in the King James where it says Lord and it's in all caps, it's actually the letters Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. 3 of those letters are in the word I am. Okay? So it's saying Hey means, one of the meanings for Hey, the letter Hey, means to pay attention. Or, I didn't write this down, but I guess I can put it down here now. I hope you all can see this. It's the word judge. Judge, hand, actually can also mean several things, right? I got it up here. The number. Remember I was talking about vibration and numbers and so forth. The letter Hey carries a number, a numeric value of 5. So it operates. It's vibrating, and that vibration is tied to the number 5. Okay. The Yod carries a numerical value of 10. So 10, Yod actually can mean connection, God connection, power, complete unity, among other things, other connected meanings, okay? So he says, pay attention or judge, my connection with you, my power, and then evaluate and act accordingly. Evaluate, pay attention, judge. The first part of judgment is evaluation, right? So when you're judging something, you're looking at it, you're looking at the evidence. That's actually the beginning of judgment. You're looking into, when you're judging something, you're looking into. And after you've gathered, you have perceived what's there, then you make a value which is also a vibration. These are vibrational activities. When you make a value, it goes down into your, it actually goes down to the part of your being that deals with feelings. If you assign a positive value, you feel good. If you assign a negative value, you feel repulsive, like you want to get away from it. But it's a feeling that makes you want to take certain action. Which means is that this can go all the way into your DNA. It can literally surpass your will. It can surpass your logic. It can surpass your reasoning, because it touches something that's recorded in your DNA. And again, we'll get into that. I know some of you are saying, man, that's not in the Bible. Yeah, actually it is. And we'll show you that as we go forward. All right? But all this is all biblical, y'all. I'm sorry, this is biblical. Does this mean that I should study Eastern mysticism? No, it does not. What it means is you need to dig into what God has been saying so that you can rightly divide. There's one minister, and he said this. He said, there is a world way of doing things. There is a evil way of doing things, which may be closely connected to the way the world's doing it. And then there's God's way of doing things. If you will discern God's way, you'll find out that God's way is actually different from the world's system as well as the evil system, because the world's way of doing things is not sourced from God. It is sourced from something else. The evil, of course, we know where that is sourced from. But when you're doing it God's way, it's sourced from Him. So, God is saying, I am light in Genesis 1 and 3. I exist as light. And because of that, remember, the same God that spoke to Moses from within the bush. He speaks from within the bush. God literally gets in or is in the bush that's burning, and he's speaking out to Moses from that burning bush. And he says, I am. That's what you tell Israel, who sent you. I am. Because in their record of creation, I know Genesis wasn't written at this time, but in the record of God dealing with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joseph, and others, there is the record of God being the source. There is the record. And in their DNA, from their environmental development, there was coded into their DNA strands the knowledge of God to the measure of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and the others. So again, if you notice, I'm using language that's contemporary in order to stay true to the scriptures. I'm going to use some of these terms, but I'm going to explain them so that you can see that they're in what God is saying. And the challenge upon you and I is not to pattern after the systems of this world. Remember, then I'm going to stop with this. Remember when Moses went to Egypt and he said, "Let my people go to Pharaoh, and here's how you will know that God sent me to do this." And he throws his staff down and becomes a serpent. And it said, for that sign, the Egyptian sorcerers and magicians, they threw their staffs down, they became snakes. But God, see, you got to understand, there are some things that yes, from that the systems of this world can do. And I would even go as far as to say they can mimic. It's called, God's way is considered the righteous real. The systems of this world, even though as benevolent as some of them may be, they are counterfeits if they do not acknowledge that God is the source of it. It's called a twisted counterfeit. So the Egyptian philosophers, sorcerers, whatever, magicians, when they threw theirs down, that was a counterfeit. It happened. It expressed itself in physical reality, but you got to keep in mind, Moses' serpent swallowed all theirs up. And then for the next 4 plagues, right, they were able to repeat. They were able to produce a twisted counterfeit. And then God says, I'm now going to set a mark. From this point on, they will not be able to do. So what God is saying, that I understand that they can do this, and I'm showing you the limits to how far the twisted counterfeit can actually go. So it's not a zero-sum game, because God gives freedom to everybody. So it's not a zero-sum game where it's either God can do this only, or the devil can do this only. It's not like that at all. But there are some things that, because man, and I know some of you are not going to get this, but Psalms 115, if I'm not mistaken, God has given dominion of the earth to man. And so out of that dominion, they are able to do certain things within the earthly arena. So, anyway, so from that point on, the rest of the other 6 plagues, the magicians, they would try to duplicate them, but they couldn't do it, because God is saying, now Moses is operating from out of me. I am Moses' source. And I'm showing now that when anybody taps into me as their source, then there's nothing that's impossible. Okay? All right, so we're going to stop there and we're going to go on to the next one. Be richly blessed. We hope you enjoyed today's session. And our prayer is that you be filled with the spirit of wisdom and revelation, that you may get to know God better. Because in getting to know God better, you begin to learn more about who you really are. So our prayer is that you would be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, so that you can walk worthy of the Lord into all pleasing, being fruitful in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. May you always learn to give thanks giving to him, because it's out of that posture of thanksgiving that you open yourself and you position yourself to receive more from God himself to you. Be richly blessed.